The stars looked different through Cathari eyes. Supreme Commander Vathri stood on the bridge of the Eternal Harmony, watching the view screen display a yellow sun in the distance. His scaled fingers tapped against the command console in a rhythm that betrayed his excitement. After 300 cycles of searching, the expeditionary fleet had finally found it. The Forbidden Zone. The ancient markers hung in space like ghost warnings. Massive structures, older than any civilization in the Concordant, floated in perfect geometric patterns around the entire star system. Each one broadcast the same message in every known language, and 1,000 dead ones too. The translation was simple. Turn back. What lies beyond is quarantined for the protection of all. By order of the progenitors. Beth had read those words 100 times. The progenitors had vanished 50,000 years ago, leaving behind only ruins and warnings. Most species in the Galactic Concord had treated their edicts as religious law. But Vithrix was a scientist before he was a commander. He believed in evidence, not ancient superstition. Analysis complete, Commander. His second officer reported Celine was a Morvathi, her crystalline body refracting the bridge lights into rainbow patterns. The markers are functional, but unmanned. No active defense systems detected. The star system beyond contains 8 planets, one in the habitable zone. We're detecting radio signals, primitive satellite networks, and what appears to be early fusion technology. The 3 felt his secondary heart skip. A civilization, not dead ruins, but living beings. The Concordant had searched for new intelligent life for generations, finding only empty worlds where species had risen and fallen. And here, locked behind ancient warnings, was exactly what they sought. What threat could primitives pose? Asked Commander Ral, the Helvine tactical officer. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion among his kind. The progenitors had technology we still cannot match. Why would they fear beings who have barely mastered their own solar system? Friss had wondered the same thing. He had presented his findings to the Concorded Council 3 months ago. The debate had lasted weeks. Half the council wanted to respect the quarantine. The other half pointed out that the progenitors were gone, their reasons lost to time. Eventually, curiosity won over caution. The council voted to send an expeditionary fleet, not to conquer, but to investigate, to make first contact, to welcome a new species into the galactic community. All ships prepare for boundary crossing, 3-3 commanded. The fleet consisted of 47 vessels, one representing each member species of the Concordant. It was meant to be a symbol of unity and peace. Proceed at 1/4 speed. Sensors at maximum. We don't know what we'll find. The Eternal Harmony crossed the boundary first. Farthrix held his breath, expecting alarms, defensive fire, something to justify the ancient warnings, but nothing happened. The marker simply continued its broadcast, uncaring that its warning had been ignored for the first time in recorded history. Sensor contacts, Silene announced suddenly. Multiple artificial structures in the outer system. They appear to be weapons platforms, but the design is crude. Vethrix studied the tactical display. Dozens of satellites orbited in a defensive shell around the 4th planet from the sun. They bristled with what looked like projectile weapons and primitive missiles. Hail them. Universal First Contact Protocols. The communications officer, a paline with voice sacs that could modulate any frequency, began broadcasting mathematical proofs, pictures of the concorded species, offers of friendship. The message repeated across every wavelength for 10 minutes. There was no response. Then the weapons platforms opened fire. Evasive action, Rail shouted, but there was no need. The projectiles were slow, ballistic, guided by systems that seemed almost archaic. The Eternal Harmony's defensive shields flared briefly as metal slugs vaporized against them. The attack ended as quickly as it began. 15 platforms had fired. All 15 attacks had failed to penetrate even the outermost shield layer. Return fire, Bethries ordered reluctantly. Disable only. Minimal force. The fleet response was measured and precise. Energy beams lanced out, cutting through the weapons platform's power cores. Within seconds, all defensive satellites in range went dark, floating uselessly in the void. The path to the inner system lay open. Continue approach, V3 commanded. Maintain first contact protocols. They may have thought we were hostile. We must show them we come in peace. The fleet moved deeper into the system, passing the gas giants and asteroid belts. Sen provided continuous updates on the system's layout. The third planet was a frozen wasteland. The fourth, the one they now approached, was designated Terra in the radio signals, or Earth in one of the dominant languages. 2 moons orbited nearby planets, both showing signs of colonization, primitive habitats, mining operations, research stations. "Commander, we're being hailed," the communications officer announced. "Audio and visual signal. It's coming from the third planet." "No, from the fourth planet, from Earth itself." On screen, the view screen changed, showing a figure that made several bridge officers gasp. It was bipedal, like many concorded species, but there was something unsettling about it. 2 eyes forward-facing, a mouth with flat teeth visible when it spoke, hair only on the top of its head, skin that seemed thin and vulnerable. The being wore some kind of uniform, dark blue with colorful patches. "This is Secretary General Chen, of the United Earth Coalition," the being said. Its language was harsh, full of hard consonants, but the translation software worked adequately. "You have entered our sovereign space and destroyed our property. We demand an explanation." Vuthri stepped forward, ensuring his image would transmit clearly. "I am Supreme Commander Vuthrix of the Galactic Concorded. We come in peace, seeking to establish communication and friendship with your people. Your weapons platforms fired upon us. We responded with minimal force. No one was harmed." The human Beth's database identified the species name from the radio signals. Stared at him for a long moment. "You crossed a clearly marked boundary. You ignored warnings that have stood for longer than our recorded history. And when we defended our home, you destroyed our defenses. This is your idea of peace. The warnings are from a dead civilization," Bethri replied, keeping his voice calm and diplomatic. "We mean you no harm. The Concorded seeks only to welcome humanity into the galactic community. There are 47 spacefaring species in known space. You would be the 48th. Secretary General Chen looked off-screen, apparently consulting with others. When he looked back, his face was harder. "The Concorded? 47 species. And how many of those species joined voluntarily, Commander?" "All of them," Beth said, confused by the question. "The Concorded does not force membership. We offer trade, technology, and protection. In return, member species contribute to the collective good and abide by Concorded law. And if we refuse," the question hung in the air. Thrick had never considered it before. In all of Concorded history, no species had refused membership. Why would they? The benefits were obvious. Technology that would advance them by centuries. Medical knowledge that would eliminate disease. Access to resources from 1,000 worlds. "That is your right," Free said carefully. "But I ask you to consider." "We refuse," Chen interrupted. "Humanity claims this star system as sovereign territory. You will withdraw immediately. Any ships that do not leave within 72 hours will be considered hostile. This is not negotiable." Several bridge officers made sounds of shock. Ral's 6 eyes widened in disbelief. "Primitives," he muttered. "They have no interstellar capability, barely any fusion technology, and they dare threaten a fleet of 47 warships." Bethri silenced him with a gesture. "Secretary General, please be reasonable. Your species has much to gain from contact with us. We can share technology that would solve your energy crisis, cure your diseases, extend your lifespans. Why would you refuse this?" Chen's expression didn't change. "Because you came to our home uninvited. You ignored our defenses. You destroyed our property. And now you act as if we should be grateful. Commander, humanity has learned hard lessons about powerful strangers bearing gifts. We will develop our own technology at our own pace. Now leave." The transmission ended abruptly. Vathri stared at the blank screen, trying to process what had just happened. In 300 cycles as a military commander, he had negotiated with dozens of species. Some were cautious, some were eager, some needed time to adjust, but none had ever simply refused. "Orders, Commander?" Celine asked quietly. Beth considered his options. The Concorded Council had given him broad authority to handle first contact as he saw fit. But they had also been clear. Violence was to be avoided if at all possible. The Concorded had not fought a true war in 2,000 years. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation, arbitration, ritual combat between champions. But what if the primitives didn't understand this? What if they saw retreat as weakness? Maintain position, V3 decided. We'll give them 24 hours to reconsider. Surely once their leaders consult with scientists and rational minds, they'll see the benefit of cooperation. And if they don't, Ral asked. Beth turned to his tactical officer. Then we proceed to Plan Sigma. We establish a concorded presence on one of their outer planets, not as conquerors, but as neighbors. We demonstrate our peaceful intentions through actions. Eventually they'll come to us. It was a sound plan, logical, reasonable. It was how the Concorded had always operated. Show strength, but also show restraint. Demonstrate superiority, but offer partnership rather than domination. Fricks ordered the fleet to take up positions around Earth's orbit, far enough away to not seem threatening, close enough to respond to any communication. Then he retired to his quarters to draft a report for the Concorded Council. He wrote about the successful crossing of the boundary. He described the human response and their refusal of contact. He outlined his plan for peaceful coexistence. As he wrote, he felt confident in his decisions. This was a minor setback. Nothing more. In a few days, perhaps a week, cooler heads would prevail on Earth. The humans would realize they had nothing to fear. Y3 sent his report and prepared for sleep. His species required only 4 hours of rest per cycle. He set his quarters to the proper temperature and humidity, then lay down on his sleeping platform. He didn't know that on Earth's surface, something very different was happening. He didn't know that humanity's military forces were mobilizing on a scale not seen since their last global war. He didn't know that factories were being retold, weapons pulled from storage, soldiers recalled from retirement. He didn't know that when Secretary General Chen asked for 72 hours, he wasn't asking for time to prepare surrender documents. He was asking for time to prepare for war. And when V3 had reduced that time to 24 hours, he had made humanity's choice much easier. The humans had tried diplomacy. They had stated their boundaries clearly. They had given warning. Now they would do what humans had always done when backed into a corner by a superior force. They would fight. 20 hours after the ultimatum, V3 was awakened by emergency alarms. He rushed to the bridge, still fastening his ceremonial armor, finding his crew in various states of panic. "Report," he commanded, taking his position at the center console. Selene's crystalline form pulsed with agitated colors. Multiple launches from Earth's surface. Hundreds of craft all on intercept vectors. Chemical propulsion. Nuclear warheads detected. They're attacking. Commander V3 felt confusion before concern. Nuclear weapons. Those were ancient technology banned by the Concorded for 800 years, as too brutal even for ritual combat. Surely this was a mistake. Hail them. There must be a misunderstanding. But the communications channel returned only static. The human missiles climbed through Earth's atmosphere on pillars of fire. Primitive, but numerous. Fricks counted 300 warheads targeting the fleet position. "Defensive measures only," he ordered. "Point defense systems, minimal power. We'll intercept them safely, then resume negotiations." The fleet response was almost lazy. Energy beams reached out precise and measured, detonating warheads at safe distances. Nuclear fireballs bloomed in the void, bright and terrible, but ultimately harmless at such ranges. Within minutes, all 300 missiles had been neutralized. "Maintain position," Beth said firmly. "They're testing our defenses. Once they realize conventional weapons are ineffective, though, more launches." Silene interrupted. 600 missiles this time, and detecting movement from their moon colonies. Armed craft launching from there as well. This was excessive. Bromthrix felt his primary heart rate increase. "Continue defensive protocols and send another message. Tell them this is wasteful and unnecessary." The second wave died like the first, filling near Earth space with radiation and debris. Then came a third wave, and a fourth. The humans seemed to have endless stockpiles of nuclear weapons, each wave larger than the last. By the 10th wave, Wethry stopped counting the individual missiles. "They're not stopping," Ral observed, his tactical display showing launch sites across Earth's surface. "Every nation on that planet is firing everything they have." It's wasteful, irrational, Beth had to agree. The concorded way of war was efficient. Two fleets would meet, exchange ritual challenges, and fight until one side reached acceptable casualties, usually around 15% losses. Then the losing side would surrender. Terms would be negotiated, and peace would resume. Clean, civilized, rational. This was none of those things. "Commander, we're detecting ships launching from Earth," Silene reported. "Not missiles, crewed vessels. They appear to be modified mining and cargo ships, but they're armed. Kinetic weapons, railguns, and are those chemical rockets strapped to mining lasers." The human fleet was a joke by concorded standards. Vrix counted 70 ships total, cobbled together from civilian vessels. They had no shields, minimal armor, and weapons that looked like they'd been welded on by someone who barely understood the concept of space combat. "They're going to attack us with that?" Rail asked, his voice mixing confusion with something that might have been pity. "They must know they can't win." "Open a channel," Beth ordered. "I need to speak with whoever is commanding this to fleet." The view screen showed a different human this time, female, wearing a military uniform covered in medals and insignia. Her face was weathered, her hair gray, but her eyes held something Vithrix had never seen before in a sentient being facing superior force. Absolute determination. "This is Admiral Martinez of the United Earth Defense Force," she said. "You have 4 hours to leave our system, Commander. After that, we stopped being polite." Bethrix blinked his secondary eyelids in confusion. "Admiral, please. You must see this is pointless. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your ships are inferior in every measurable way. I don't wish to see your people die needlessly. Accept concorded membership, and this can all end peacefully." Martinez smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You think we don't know we can't win a straight fight? Commander, humans don't believe in straight fights. We believe in winning. And if we can't do that, we believe in making the other side regret they ever met us." The transmission ended. Vithic turned to his officers, seeing his own confusion reflected in their faces. "She's bluffing. She must be. No species fights when they know they'll lose. It's inefficient." "Orders," Commander Silene asked. Beth's made his decision. "We proceed with Plan Sigma. Tactical select landing sites on the 4th moon of their gas giant. We'll establish a base there. Demonstrate our technological superiority peacefully. Eventually, they'll see reason." The fleet began moving, breaking formation to head for Jupiter's moon, Ganymede. Long-range sensors had identified it as suitable for colonization. Water, ice, minerals far enough from Earth to not seem threatening. They would build a base, show humanity what concorded technology could achieve, and wait for the primitives to come around. The human fleet followed them, all 70 ramshackle ships, struggling to keep pace with vessels capable of 8 light-speeded. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so tragic. "They're going to follow us all the way," Ral noted. "What do we do when we arrive? If they attack our landing force, then we disable their ships without casualties and proceed with the mission," Bethry said firmly. "We are not butchers. We do not kill sentients who cannot defend themselves adequately." The journey to Ganymede took 6 hours. The entire time the human fleet shadowed them. Vithrix used the time to study Earth's databases, trying to understand these strange beings who refused to acknowledge reality. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humanity's history was a litany of wars, not ritual combats or brief conflicts, but prolonged brutal struggles that consumed entire generations. They had fought with stones, then bronze, then iron, then steel. They had invented gunpowder, specifically to kill each other more efficiently. They had created weapons that could poison the land for generations. They had built bombs that could destroy entire cities. And they had used all of these things, not as deterrents, but as tools. War was woven into human culture like breathing. They sang songs about battles. They erected monuments to their wars. They taught their children about famous conflicts the way concorded species taught mathematics. "This can't be accurate," Beth muttered, reading about something humans called the World Wars. Conflicts that killed millions. Millions. The entire concorded hadn't lost that many beings to violence in 10,000 years. "Commander, we're approaching Ganymede," Selene announced. "Beginning landing operations." 3 transports will deploy the initial colonization modules while the fleet maintains orbital support. The landing ships descended toward the moon's icy surface. Beth watched their progress, satisfied. This would work. Once humanity saw what the Concorded could build, how they could transform a barren moon into a livable habitat within weeks, they would understand. Then the human fleet arrived, and things went wrong very quickly. The modified cargo ships didn't slow down. They didn't attempt to enter orbit. Instead, they dove straight for the Concorded landing zone at maximum thrust. "They're on collision courses," Ral shouted. "Multiple ships heading straight for our transports. They're not firing weapons. They're going to ram us." "Evasive action," Bethry ordered. But 2 of the transports were already committed to landing, too close to the surface to maneuver effectively. The human ships slammed into them at full speed. The explosions were visible from orbit, nuclear fuel mixed with chemical propellants, creating fireballs that lit up Ganymede's dark surface. Both Concorded transports were destroyed instantly. The human ships were obliterated, no survivors on either side. "They killed themselves," Sene whispered, her crystalline body flickering with shock. "They committed suicide to stop our landing." But the attack wasn't over. More human ships dove from orbit, not at the remaining transport, but at the Concorded fleet itself. They had loaded their cargo holds with anything that could explode: nuclear waste, chemical compounds, even just compressed gases. Each ship became a missile, guided by a crew willing to die to strike one more blow. "Return fire," Bethry finally ordered, his voice shaking. "Disable them. Stop them before they reach us." The fleet's weapons, designed for precise ritual combat, proved devastatingly effective against the fragile human vessels. Energy beams carved through hulls like paper. Railgun slugs shattered entire ships into fragments. Within minutes, the human attack was broken. 60 of their 70 ships destroyed or crippled, but 3 ships got through. One rammed a Concorded cruiser at such speed that it punched completely through the hull before exploding internally. Another detonated its payload of nuclear waste against a battleship's engines, contaminating the entire aft section. The third simply crashed into a corvette, the impact alone enough to it. "Casualty report," Beth demanded, his voice hollow. Ral consulted his screens with shaking appendages. 2 ships destroyed, 3 heavily damaged. Estimated casualties: 2,412 dead or missing. Another 1,000 injured. 2,000 dead. The Concorded hadn't lost that many beings to violence in a century, and the humans had inflicted these losses with ships that were barely spaceworthy, using tactics that were insane by any civilized standard. "The remaining human ships are retreating," Silene reported. "No, wait. They're heading for Mars. There are human colonies there. Small research stations, mining facilities." Bethry felt something cold settle in his chest. "Follow them. We need to secure those facilities, prevent more attacks." But part of him wondered if they had already made a terrible mistake. The progenitors had placed those warnings for a reason. And now, 20 hours after crossing the boundary, Beth was beginning to understand why the humans didn't fight like civilized beings. They didn't calculate acceptable losses or surrender when victory became impossible. They fought like cornered predators, like wounded animals, like creatures who had forgotten any way to interact with the universe except through violence. And the worst part, the truly terrifying realization that crept into Vithri's mind as he ordered the fleet to Mars, was this: the humans had barely started fighting. Everything they had thrown at the Concorded so far had been improvised, rushed, thrown together in less than a day. What would they be capable of if they had time to truly prepare for war? 3 days after the first engagement, Beth stood in the strategic planning chamber of the Eternal Harmony and realized nothing was going according to plan. The holographic display before him showed the Sol system in painful detail, with red indicators marking every point where human forces had struck at the Concorded fleet. Mars should have been easy. The research stations there held fewer than 10,000 humans total, scattered across a dozen small settlements. Thrick had sent 3 cruisers with orders to occupy the facilities peacefully, offer protection, and use the colonists as leverage for negotiations with Earth. The colonists had other ideas. Report from Mars Ground Commander Thalen, Selene said, her crystalline form dim with what Vithrix had learned to recognize as stress. The humans have fortified every habitat. They're using mining equipment as weapons, drilling lasers, explosive charges meant for excavation, even heavy machinery as improvised armor. Casualties among our landing forces are significant. How significant? Feedeth asked, though he dreaded the answer. 30% losses. Ground Commander Thalen requests authorization to use heavy weapons to neutralize the fortifications. Fricks felt his secondary heart skip again. 30% casualties, and they hadn't even captured a single settlement in any normal concorded engagement. The defenders would have surrendered at 15% losses. But the humans on Mars were civilians, scientists, engineers, miners, not soldiers, and they were fighting like demons. Negative on heavy weapons, Vthix said after a moment. We're not going to massacre civilians. Tell Thalen to establish a perimeter and wait them out. They'll run out of supplies eventually. But even as he gave the order, V3 suspected it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing about humans was simple. Commander, we're receiving a transmission from Earth, the communications officer announced. It's Secretary General Chen again. The human leader appeared on screen looking even more worn than before. Behind him, Vathrix could see what appeared to be a military command center, screen showing tactical displays and status reports. Commander Vathrix, Chen said without preamble, I'm offering you one final chance to withdraw. Leave our system now and we'll consider this unfortunate incident closed. Stay and I promise you'll regret it. Vudithrix felt anger rise in him, something he rarely experienced. Your people killed 2,000 of mine. They're killing more on Mars right now, and you have the audacity to threaten me. Secretary General, you must face reality. You cannot win this conflict. Maybe not, Chen admitted. But, Commander, let me tell you something about humanity. We've been fighting wars since before we had written language. We fought each other, our environment, diseases, predators, our own worst instincts. We're very, very good at it. And the one thing we've learned is this. You don't have to win. You just have to make winning cost more than it's worth. The transmission ended. Feedthix stared at the blank screen, Chen's words echoing in his mind. It was such an alien concept. The Concorded fought to win, yes, but also to minimize casualties, preserve resources, maintain civilization. The idea of fighting just to inflict maximum damage, even knowing you'd lose, was incomprehensible. Commander, sensors are picking up unusual activity throughout the asteroid belt, Ral reported. Multiple heat signatures. They're domed there pushing asteroids, dozens of them, all on vectors toward our fleet positions. Bethrix pulled up the tactical display. Sure enough, small ships, probably those same converted civilian vessels, were using what looked like mining charges to alter asteroid trajectories. The rocks were massive, moving slowly, but with terrible momentum, and they were all aimed at where the Concorded fleet had established defensive positions. Time to impact varies. The first will arrive in 8 hours, the last in approximately 40 hours. Commander, there are over 100 asteroids. Some are several kilometers across. If they hit our ships, they would have to move, break formation, waste fuel repositioning, disrupt their careful defensive strategies. And while they were distracted by the asteroids, what else would the humans do? Begin evasive maneuvers, V3 ordered, and get me tactical analysis on those human ships in the asteroid belt. If we can disable them, alarms shrieked across the bridge. Multiple alarms from systems that should never all fail at once. We're being boarded, Rail shouted, his 6 eyes wide with shock. Internal sensors show breach points on deck 7, 12, and 19. How did they? Frace pulled up security footage and felt his blood run cold. Human soldiers wearing primitive spacesuits and carrying projectile weapons were cutting through his ship's outer hull. But they weren't coming from ships. They were coming from space itself. From small pods that had been drifting in the debris field from the earlier battle. The humans had hidden soldiers inside wreckage, waiting for the Concorded fleet to pass by. Security teams to breach points, Vithrix commanded. Subdue the intruders, non-lethal force. But the security footage showed something that made Vithrix question everything he knew about combat. The humans didn't fight like civilized soldiers. They used the ship's own corridors against its defenders, setting ambushes, using explosives in enclosed spaces, targeting critical systems, rather than engaging in honorable combat. One human squad breached the life support controls on Deck 12. Another fought their way to the armory on Deck 7. A third was heading straight for the bridge, moving through the ship's maintenance tunnels like they'd studied the layouts beforehand. How many intruders? Beth demanded. Sensors show approximately 100 humans across the fleet. Celine reported they're targeting our command ships. Commander, they're moving through our vessels like they're designed for this. Our security forces are taking heavy casualties. Of course they were. Concordat security troops were trained for riot control, for managing drunk crew members for ceremonial duties. They weren't trained for actual combat against an enemy that seemed to have no concept of surrender or acceptable losses. Seal the bridge, Beth ordered. Rue command functions to auxiliary control, and someone tell me how they knew exactly where to board us. The answer came from an unexpected source. One of the captured human soldiers, wounded but alive, spoke through a translator before dying. His final words were, "We've been watching your formation patterns for 3 days. You people are predictable, efficient. You do everything by the book. That's your weakness. Predictable." The word stung, because it was true. The Concordat had refined space combat over thousands of years, optimizing every tactic, every strategy. They moved in precise formations, responded to threats with calculated measures, followed protocols that had been proven effective. Against other Concordat species, it worked perfectly. Against humans who apparently had no respect for established military doctrine, it was a liability. "Purge the intruders," Beth ordered, abandoning his earlier command about non-lethal force. "Vent affected sections to space if necessary. We need to regain control." The battle inside his own ship lasted 4 hours. By the end, all the human boarders were dead, but they'd accomplished their objective. Critical systems were damaged. The armory had been breached and weapons stolen. Worst of all, they'd uploaded something into the ship's computer system, a virus that would take days to fully purge. And this was happening across the fleet. Every major vessel reported boarding actions. Some fought them off quickly, others struggled for hours. 2 ships lost life support entirely and had to be evacuated. "Status report," Beth demanded when the immediate crisis had passed. Raoul looked exhausted, his tactical displays showing carnage throughout the fleet. "Total casualties now exceed 5,000 dead, 8,000 wounded. We've lost 4 ships completely. Another 12 are combat ineffective. Commander, at this rate," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. At this rate, the Concordat expeditionary fleet would be destroyed, not by superior technology or overwhelming force, but by an enemy that fought with such savage creativity that no defense seemed adequate. "Pull back," Vithry said quietly. "All ships retreat to the outer system. We need time to reorganize, treat our wounded, repair our vessels." "Commander, that will look like defeat," Celine protested. "The Concordat has not retreated from primitives in recorded history. The Concordat has never fought primitives like these," Beth replied. "Execute the order." The fleet began its withdrawal, moving away from Earth and Mars, toward the outer planets. It should have been a strategic repositioning, nothing more. But the humans pursued, not with ships this time, but with weapons. Vuthrix was only beginning to understand. Missiles with thermonuclear warheads launched from Earth reached out across the void. Most were intercepted, but some got through. Detonating close enough to damage shields and sensor arrays, railgun slugs fired from Mars, traveling at tremendous velocities, peppered the retreating fleet. Each impact was tiny, but there were thousands of them, eroding armor and puncturing hulls. And then Earth launched something new. Feeth watched in horror as 6 massive vessels lifted from the planet's surface. They were crude, obviously rushed into production, but they were also huge, each one massing as much as a Concordat battleship. "What are those?" he asked, though part of him already knew. "Analysis shows they're filled with nuclear warheads, hundreds of them in each ship. Commander, they're planet cracker-level weapons. If those detonate near our fleet, they were suicide ships like the ramming attack at Ganymede, but on a massive scale. Each vessel was crewed by volunteers who had no intention of returning home. Their only purpose was to get close to the Concordat fleet and detonate all weapons maximum range." V3 ordered. Destroy those ships before they reach us. The fleet concentrated its fire on the approaching vessels. Energy beams hot enough to vaporize steel carved into their hulls. Railguns fired in continuous streams. Missiles deployed in swarms. But the human ships kept coming, their crews refusing to evacuate, even as their vessels came apart around them. 4 were destroyed at long range. The 5th was crippled, but managed to detonate its payload. The nuclear blast washing over 2 Concorded frigates and destroying them both. The 6th reached point-blank range before a desperate ramming action by a Concorded corvette stopped it, both ships dying in the resulting explosion. When the battle ended, the Concorded fleet had been reduced by half. 23 ships remained operational out of the original 47. Casualties exceeded 12,000 dead, and they had achieved exactly nothing. No strategic objectives met, no territory secured, no diplomatic progress made. Wuthrich sat in his command chair, staring at the tactical display that showed the remnants of his fleet limping toward the outer system. How had this happened? They had superior technology, superior numbers, superior training. By every logical measure, this should have been an easy campaign. But humans didn't fight logically. They fought desperately, creatively, viciously. They used tactics the Concorded had never encountered, because no civilized species would consider them. They accepted casualties that would have broken any other race, and they showed absolutely no sign of stopping. "Commander, message from the Concorded Council," Silene said quietly. "They're demanding a full report on why we've suffered such losses against primitives." Wuthrich laughed bitterly. How could he explain this to beings who had never known real war? How could he make them understand that humanity wasn't primitive at all? They were specialists, experts in the one field the Concorded had tried to evolve beyond. "Tell the Council," Beth said slowly, "that we have crossed a boundary we should have respected. Tell them the progenitors were right, and tell them," he paused, choosing his next words carefully, "tell them that if we continue this campaign, we won't be bringing humanity into the Concord. We'll be teaching the galaxy how to fight like humans. And once that knowledge spreads, there will be no going back." The Concorded Council chamber was a marvel of architecture, built on the neutral world of Sanctuary at the exact gravitational center of Concorded space. Representatives from all 47 member species gathered here to make decisions that affected trillions of beings. Today, that chamber was in chaos. Wuthrich stood before them, his armor scorched and damaged, his body showing wounds from the boarding action 3 weeks ago. Around him, holographic displays showed the wreckage of his fleet, the casualty lists, the tactical analyses that all pointed to the same impossible conclusion. Humanity was winning. 15,000 dead. Council member Shivara of the Paline spoke, her voice sacs vibrating with barely controlled anger. 15,000 Concorded citizens killed by primitives who have barely mastered their own solar system. Commander V3 explained how this is possible. Wuthrich had prepared this speech during the long journey back to Concorded space. He had rehearsed it, refined it, made it as clear as possible. But now, standing before the council, he realized no amount of explanation could make them understand what he had witnessed. "Humanity is not primitive," he began. "They are specialists. While we have spent 10,000 years learning to avoid war, they have spent that same time perfecting it. Every aspect of their culture, their technology, their psychology, is shaped by conflict. They don't just fight. They are incapable of not fighting." "Nonsense," snapped Council Member Rethick, the Helvine military coordinator. "All civilized species learn to control violent impulses. It's a prerequisite for space travel. A species that cannot cooperate destroys itself before reaching the stars. That's what we believed," Bethry agreed. "But humans are different. They do cooperate, just never for long. Their entire history is cycles of cooperation followed by competition. They form alliances, then fight among themselves, then form new alliances against external threats. It's their natural state." The council chamber filled with the sounds of disbelief, chittering, humming, vocal displays of skepticism from dozens of species. Wuthrich pressed on. "But the truly dangerous part isn't their capacity for violence. It's how they think about conflict. We view war as a failure of diplomacy, something to be minimized and controlled. They view it as a tool, something to be studied and perfected. They teach their children military history. They write books about strategy. They play games that simulate warfare for entertainment. "This is absurd," Shivara declared. "Commander, you're describing psychopaths, not a viable civilization. No species could maintain social cohesion with such destructive tendencies." Beth pulled up a holographic image, a human child's book he had recovered from a captured data file. It showed colorful illustrations of historical battles, soldiers, weapons. The text taught basic military tactics, as if they were multiplication tables. "They don't see it as destructive," Beth explained. "They see it as survival. On their homeworld, they were not the strongest predators, not the fastest, not the most naturally armed. So, they became the smartest, the most adaptable, the most persistent, and they hunted everything else to extinction or domestication. That same mindset now shapes how they approach all challenges, including us." The council chamber fell silent. Feathers could see the discomfort on every alien face, the struggle to comprehend a species so fundamentally different from everything they knew. "What do you recommend?" asked High Counselor Zan, the eldest member of the council and a Morvathi who had served for 300 cycles. His crystalline body refracted the chamber's light into somber colors. "We withdraw completely," Bethry said. "We restore the boundary markers, respect the quarantine, and leave humanity alone, for their sake and for ours." "Unacceptable," Rethik said immediately. "The Concorded does not retreat. If we show weakness now, every primitive species we encounter in the future will think they can defy us." "With respect, council member, they're not primitive," Vithri repeated. "And this isn't about pride. It's about survival. If we continue this war, one of two things will happen. Either we destroy humanity completely, committing genocide to eliminate a threat, which would violate every principle the Concorded stands for, or humanity will eventually force us to adapt to their methods of warfare. And if that happens, if we start thinking and fighting like humans, the Concorded as we know it will cease to exist." Paranoid speculation, Rethik dismissed. One species cannot change an entire civilization of 47 member races. Beth's wished that were true, but he had spent weeks analyzing the data, and he had seen something that terrified him more than any human weapon. "Permission to present evidence?" he asked. High Counselor Zan nodded. Vitri activated a new set of displays, showing incident reports from across Concorded space over the past 3 weeks. "The Cathari Third Fleet engaged in training exercises last week," Vithix began. "For the first time in recorded history, they incorporated human-style tactics into their scenarios. Ramming attacks, boarding actions, asymmetric warfare. Their commanders wanted to understand how humanity defeated us." Another display lit up. "The Helvine Military Academy has begun teaching a new course, Primitive Warfare Studies. They're analyzing human historical conflicts, looking for lessons. 200 students enrolled in the first week. More displays, each showing similar reports. The Pelthine entertainment networks are broadcasting shows about human wars. Violent content that would have been banned a month ago is now attracting billions of viewers. The Morvathi Crystal Singers are composing new works about battle and conflict, themes that haven't appeared in their art for 5,000 years. Beth let the evidence speak for itself. "This is what I mean by catastrophe. It's not just that humans can fight effectively. It's that their way of thinking is contagious. Every species that learns about humanity starts asking questions they never asked before. What if we didn't surrender at 15% casualties? What if we struck first instead of negotiating? What if we stopped being civilized?" The council chamber erupted into argument. Some members dismissed Vorthri's concerns as overblown. Others demanded immediate military action to eliminate the human threat. A few, like High Counselor Zan, sat in thoughtful silence. The debate raged for hours. Finally, Zan called for order. "We will vote." The High Counselor announced 3 options: complete withdrawal and restoration of the quarantine, continued military action with the goal of forcing human surrender, or the third option, full integration, bringing humanity into the Concorded by any means necessary. The vote was split almost evenly. Withdrawal had the support of older, more cautious members. Military action attracted the younger, more aggressive voices. Integration seemed like a compromise, but had the fewest supporters. In the end, military action won by a narrow margin. The Concorded would send a new fleet, larger and better prepared for human tactics. They would secure key positions in the Sol system, establish a permanent presence, and force humanity to accept Concorded authority. Vithrix was ordered to remain on Sanctuary to advise the new fleet commander. As the council chamber emptied, he stood alone before the holographic displays, watching the vote tallies fade. He had failed. The council hadn't understood. Or perhaps they had understood, but couldn't accept the implications. Either way, the Concordant was about to make the same mistake again, just on a larger scale. A week later, the Second Expeditionary Fleet departed for human space. 100 ships, the largest military force the Concorde had assembled in 1,000 years. Beth watched them go, feeling like he was witnessing the beginning of the end. The reports from the front arrived sporadically over the following months. At first, they seemed positive. The larger fleet successfully established positions in the Sol system. Human attacks were repelled with acceptable casualties. Ground forces secured several installations on Mars and Europa. Then the tone of the reports began to change. Humanity hadn't been idle during the months between the first and second expeditions. They had learned, adapted, built new weapons based on captured Concorded technology. Their ships still used primitive fusion drives, but now they had stolen shield generators. Their weapons were still projectile-based, but now they used Concorde targeting computers. More concerning was their strategy. Instead of defending their home system, human fleets began striking at Concorded supply lines. They raided mining operations in nearby systems, destroyed unmanned cargo ships, sabotaged refueling stations. They fought a guerrilla war across dozens of light years, forcing the Concorded to spread its forces thin. And then came the truly catastrophic development. 3 Concorded species, the Peltine, Helvine, and Cathari, began having internal conflicts. Not ritual combats or political disputes, but actual violence. Protests turned into riots. Riots turned into armed conflicts. Within weeks, 3 member species were fighting civil wars. Beth studied the reports and saw the pattern immediately. The conflicts all started the same way. Younger members of each species demanding more aggressive responses to humanity. When their governments refused, violence erupted, and the tactics used in these civil wars looked disturbingly familiar. Ambushes, sabotage, targeting civilian infrastructure to create pressure. They were fighting like humans. It's spreading, Vuri told High Counselor Zan during one of their regular consultations. The mimetic virus I warned about, species that have never known real war, are learning from humanity, and they're using those lessons against each other. Zan's crystalline body pulsed with colors Vudthrix had never seen before, something between fear and fascination. Can it be stopped? I don't know, Vudthric admitted. Knowledge can't be unlearned. Once you understand that total war is possible, that surrender isn't mandatory, that casualties are just numbers, how do you forget that? The situation deteriorated rapidly. The Second Expeditionary Fleet sent increasingly desperate requests for reinforcements. The civil wars in Concorded space grew worse. Other species began showing signs of the same infection, questioning why they followed rules humanity ignored, wondering if efficiency was weakness, starting to see violence as a viable solution instead of a last resort. 6 months after the Second Fleet's departure, they received the message everyone had been dreading. "This is Fleet Commander Sakes," the transmission began. The Pelthine officer looked exhausted, his voice sacs barely able to maintain proper modulation. "We are abandoning the Sol system. Human forces they've done something we didn't think possible." The recording showed footage that made Vithrix's blood run cold. Human ships, dozens of them, but they didn't look like the converted civilian vessels from before. These were purpose-built warships, sleek and deadly, incorporating Concorded technology with human design philosophy. "They captured one of our shipyards," Alex continued. "We don't know how, but they've been producing hybrid vessels for months. Ships with our shields and their weapons, our engines, and their tactics. They're not primitives anymore. They're not even human anymore. Not entirely. There's something new, something worse." The recording showed battle footage. Human concorded hybrid ships moving with impossible coordination using tactics no concorded computer could predict, because they combined cold logic with human intuition. They fought with the efficiency of machines and the creativity of madmen. Total fleet casualties exceed 40%, Sal reported. We cannot hold this position. We cannot win this war. I'm ordering full retreat. May the progenitors forgive us for what we've unleashed. The transmission ended. Bethrix and High Counselor Zan sat in silence, watching the empty screen. This is the catastrophe, Beth finally said. Not that humanity defeated us, but that in trying to defeat them, we've become more like them, and now that knowledge exists in our space, it will spread. The concorded, as we knew it, is already gone. Zan's color shifted to deep, mournful tones. What do we do now? What we should have done from the beginning, Bethrix replied. We respect the boundary. We leave humanity alone, and we pray that we can remember how to be civilized before we forget completely. The meeting place was neutral by necessity and symbolic by design. Neither side trusted the other enough to meet on their own territory, so they chose a small moon orbiting a dead star halfway between Su and the nearest concorded system. The moon had no name, no resources, no strategic value. It was perfect. Vathri stood in the hastily constructed meeting chamber, watching through reinforced windows as human ships took up positions around the moon. They were the new hybrid designs, sleek vessels that combined concorded technology with human engineering. They made him deeply uncomfortable, these physical manifestations of how much had changed in just 2 years. They're here, announced his aide, a young Cathari officer who had never known the concorded before the human war. That simple fact made V3 sadder than he wanted to admit. An entire generation had grown up knowing only conflict, uncertainty, and fear. Secretary General Chen entered the chamber, flanked by Admiral Martinez and 2 other humans V3 didn't recognize. All wore military uniforms, though Chen's was more formal, decorated with insignia that probably meant something in human culture. Chen looked older. The last 2 years had aged him visibly, adding gray to his hair and lines to his face, but his eyes still held that same determination Forthrix remembered from their first encounter. Commander V3, Chen said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. V3 had learned enough about human customs to take it. Though the physical contact still felt strange, Secretary General Chen, Admiral Martinez. Beth gestured to the seats arranged in the chamber center. Thank you for agreeing to meet. You said it was urgent, Chen replied, taking his seat. That you had information we needed to hear. So, here we are. Beth activated the holographic display showing a map of concorded space. Red indicators marked dozens of systems, more than half of all concorded worlds. This is the current state of the Galactic Concord, V3 began. Red indicates systems experiencing active internal conflicts. Orange indicates systems where conflict is likely within the next year. Green indicates systems that remain stable. There was very little green on the map. Civil wars, Beth continued. Territorial disputes, resource conflicts. Species that have lived in peace for thousands of years are now fighting each other, and they're using tactics, strategies, and philosophies they learned from studying humanity. Chen studied the map without expression. You're saying this is our fault? I'm saying this is what happens when you teach warfare to species that have forgotten how to fight, Bethry replied. The Concorded spent 10,000 years creating a civilization based on cooperation, compromise, and controlled conflict. In 2 years, humanity has shattered that foundation. Admiral Martinez leaned forward, her voice hard. We didn't ask you to invade our home. We gave you warnings. We gave you chances to leave. You chose to ignore both. I know, Vithrix said quietly, and I take responsibility for that decision. I crossed the boundary the progenitors set, believing I knew better than beings far wiser than myself. I was wrong. The admission seemed to catch the humans off guard. Chen exchanged glances with Martinez before speaking. Commander, why are we here? If you're looking for an apology, you won't get one. We defended our home. I'm not looking for an apology, Vithik said. I'm offering information. Information you need to understand what's happening and why it matters to both our peoples. He changed the holographic display, showing historical records from the progenitors' era. Ancient texts, Archaeological findings. Computer models reconstructed from fragments. The progenitors were the first spacefaring civilization in this galaxy. Vathri explained they explored, they cataloged, they tried to unite species under a single banner. They were successful for a time, building an empire that spanned thousands of worlds. Then they encountered a species that was different. A species that fought not for territory or resources, but simply because fighting was their nature. Let me guess. Chen said they were predators, apex hunters, like humans. Exactly like humans, V3 confirmed. The progenitors called them the Ravagers. They tried diplomacy, trade, integration. Nothing worked. The Ravagers only understood strength in conflict. War broke out. It lasted for centuries and nearly destroyed both civilizations. V3 pulled up images of ruined worlds, dead systems, planets reduced to radioactive wastelands. Eventually, the progenitors won, but at a terrible cost. They had to become like the Ravagers to defeat them. They had to learn cruelty, ruthlessness, total war. And once they learned those lessons, they couldn't unlearn them. The progenitor civilization collapsed into internal conflicts that made the war with the Ravagers look peaceful by comparison. So they wiped themselves out, Martinez said. And now you think we're going to do the same to you? Worse, V3 said. The progenitors left records warnings. They documented what happened to them so that future civilizations might avoid the same fate. And one of their final messages was this: predator species are not the enemy. The knowledge of predation is the enemy. Once peaceful species learn to think like predators, there is no going back. He changed the display again, showing the Sol system with its ancient boundary markers. The progenitors found Earth. They studied humanity, and they made a decision. They didn't exterminate you or try to change you. They simply isolated you, hoping that either humanity would evolve past its violent nature or that the rest of the galaxy would become strong enough to interact with you safely. And you ruined that plan, Chen said flatly. We ruined that plan, Beth agreed. By crossing the boundary, we exposed the Concorded to humanity before either side was ready. Now the knowledge of human warfare is spreading through Concorded space like a disease. Species are learning to fight total wars, to accept massive casualties, to view conflict as a tool rather than a failure. So what do you want from us? Chen asked. You want us to somehow take back the knowledge, make your people forget how to fight? No, V3 said. I want us to restore the boundary properly this time, with understanding on both sides of what it means and why it's necessary. The humans were silent for a long moment. Finally, Chen spoke. You want us to go back into isolation, to give up access to the galaxy, to other species, to all the knowledge and resources out there. I'm asking you to quarantine yourselves voluntarily, Bethri said. Not forever, just until the Concorded can stabilize, until we can remember how to be civilized again, and until humanity has time to develop without our interference. And if we refuse, Martinez asked. We have ships now, technology. We could push into Concorded space if we wanted to. You could, V3 admitted. And you'd probably win. Human ships are already superior in many ways to ours. But Secretary General Admiral, consider what that would mean. Every world you conquer, every species you defeat, would learn from you. The mimetic virus would spread faster. Within a generation, the entire galaxy would be at war. Billions would die. Civilizations would fall. Is that the legacy humanity wants? Chen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the human fleet. We didn't want any of this. We just wanted to be left alone. I know, Bethri said, and I'm offering you that. A restoration of the quarantine. But this time, by mutual agreement. Humanity stays in the Sol system. The Concordant stays outside the boundary. We'll leave monitoring stations at agreed-upon locations. If humanity develops peaceful contact protocols, if the Concordant stabilizes, if both sides believe the time is right, then, and only then, do we try again. How long? Shen asked, not turning from the window. I don't know, Beth admitted. Centuries, perhaps, maybe longer. The progenitors' records suggest it took 5,000 years for their civilization to recover from learning predator warfare. The Concordant may need just as long. Admiral Martinez stood as well. You're asking us to sacrifice our future, to accept isolation while every other species in the galaxy gets to explore, trade, and advance together. I'm asking you to accept temporary isolation so that both humanity and the Concorded have a future at all. Bethry countered. The alternative is mutually assured destruction on a galactic scale. The humans conferred quietly among themselves. Bethry couldn't hear their words, but he could see the debate playing out in their body language. Chen's shoulders slumped with the weight of the decision. Martinez argued forcefully, her hands cutting through the air in sharp gestures. The other two humans offered opinions that seemed to moderate both positions. Finally, Chen returned to the table. We need concessions. Name them, Vithri said. First, human ships can travel freely within our own solar system. We continue developing our worlds, our technology at our own pace. No interference. Agreed. Second, we keep the hybrid technology we've developed. We don't give back concorded designs, and you don't try to sabotage our ships. Agreed, with one condition. Bethry said, you don't share that technology with any other species. If you encounter other spacefaring civilizations, you maintain the same isolation with them that we're establishing today. Chen considered this. We'd need verification, some way to monitor for other civilizations approaching our space. We'll maintain a monitoring station outside the boundary, Beth offered. We'll share data on any approaching vessels. We'll even help defend the boundary if necessary. Third, Chen continued, this has to be a treaty, not a surrender. Equal parties agreeing to mutual non-cont. We're not accepting quarantine as punishment. We're choosing isolation as policy. That's how I want it written as well. Bethry agreed. The Concordant made the mistake of crossing your boundary. We take responsibility for that. This treaty corrects our error. And finally, Chen said, we want human observers on that monitoring station. We need to know you're keeping your word, that you're not preparing another invasion. Vithrix hesitated, allowing humans into concorded space, even in a limited capacity. Violated the entire point of the quarantine, but Chen was right. Trust couldn't be established without verification. 3 human observers maximum, Vothri countered. Rotated every 2 years. They'll have access to monitoring data, but not weapons or ships, and they'll be accompanied by concordant liaison at all times. Acceptable, Chen said after a moment. He extended his hand again. We have an agreement in principle. Vitathrix took the hand, feeling the strange human custom again. We have an agreement. The formal treaty took weeks to draft. Lawyers, diplomats, and technical experts from both sides worked to translate intentions into binding language. There were disputes over wording, arguments about implementation, moments when the entire process nearly collapsed. But eventually, they had a document both sides could accept the treaty of the restored boundary. They called it. It established a neutral zone around the Sol system. It detailed monitoring procedures, communication protocols, and emergency exceptions. It even included provisions for eventual contact, though both sides acknowledged the day might be centuries away. The signing ceremony was brief and witnessed by representatives from both governments. V3 signed for the Concorded. Chen signed for humanity. The treaty was transmitted simultaneously to both capitals, officially binding. As the ceremony concluded and humans prepared to return to their ships, Chen approached V3 one final time. Do you think it will work? Chen asked quietly. Can your people really unlearn what they've learned from us? Beth considered the question carefully. I don't know, but I know we have to try. The alternative is worse. And humanity, Chen pressed. Do you think we'll evolve past our violent nature? That someday we'll be ready to join your concordant peacefully? I think, Vithik said slowly, that humanity is what it is. Predators, survivors, warriors. But I also think you're capable of choosing when to fight and when to hold back. Today you chose to hold back. That gives me hope. Chen nodded. One more question. The Ravagers, the species that nearly destroyed the progenitors. What happened to them? They died, Beth said. All of them. They fought each other after the progenitors were gone, fragmenting into smaller and smaller groups until none remained. The final lesson the progenitors left us was this. A species that knows only war eventually runs out of enemies and turns on itself. Then we'll have to be more than warriors, Chen said. We'll have to learn to be something else as well. I hope so, Vithrix replied. For both our sakes, the humans departed. The boundary was restored. New markers were placed updated with current languages and technology, but carrying the same message the progenitors had left millennia ago. Turn back. What lies beyond is quarantined for the protection of all. Bethrix remained at the monitoring station, accepting the assignment as his punishment and his penance. He watched human ships return to their solar system and stay there. He watched concorded space slowly, painfully, begin to stabilize as the shock of human contact faded into memory. Years passed. The civil wars ended. The Concord began to remember what it had been before humanity. But something had changed forever. They were more cautious now, more aware of their own vulnerability. They had learned that peace was a choice, not an inevitability, that civilization was fragile, that there were things in the universe that could change them fundamentally. The human observers rotated through the monitoring station as promised. Fry spoke with them, learned from them, began to understand their species in ways he never had during the war. He learned that humans were more than warriors. They were also artists, dreamers, philosophers. They created beauty, even as they perfected violence. They loved their children, even as they prepared them for conflict. One day, nearly 1,000 years after the treaty signing, a concorded vessel approached the boundary. It carried scientists, diplomats, and explorers, a new generation that had grown up knowing humanity only through historical records. They requested permission to send a message into human space, to ask if the time for renewed contact had finally arrived. Thrick, now ancient even by Cathari standards, approved the transmission. The response came 3 days later. This is the Human Council of Earth. The message began, transmitted from a species that had changed as much as the Concord in the intervening centuries. We have received your inquiry. We are interested. Send a small delegation, unarmed. We will talk carefully. Beth watched the diplomatic ship cross the boundary for the second time in concorded history. This time, no weapons fired. This time, both sides approached with caution, respect, and hard-won wisdom. He didn't know if it would succeed. He didn't know if humanity and the concorded could ever truly coexist peacefully. But he knew they had learned something important. Some boundaries exist, not to separate enemies, but to protect friends from destroying each other. And sometimes the greatest act of strength is knowing when not to cross a line. The boundary had been crossed, catastrophe had followed, and both civilizations had barely survived. But they had survived, and in surviving, they had learned. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was everything.